We all remember a moment when music changed our lives. For many in Generation X, that moment came sometime in late 1991, when a simple driving chord progression introduced us to Smells Like Teen Spirit, the first track on Nirvana's Nevermind. Endless play on MTV, and a new sound that combined the angst of punk with the musical competence of classic rock sent Nirvana blazing across the musical skies in a 2-year arc that ended in Kurt Cobain's tragic suicide. The meteor also came to Earth and destroyed the dinosaurs that were the hair bands of the late 80s. Rock music was never the same, and neither were your hosts. So, we caught a red-eye flight to the Seattle in our minds and mixed up some lumberjack cocktails to revisit the album that made alternative mainstream. It's time for episode 65 of Toasting the Classics, Nirvana's Nevermind. Welcome to Toasting the Classics. This is the podcast where we take something people call a classic, talk about it, and decide if it's still a classic. And while we're doing so, we drink something that's inspired by the classic. What are we doing this week? Or this is your pick.
This is Nirvana Nevermind. So Nirvana's Nevermind premiered in late 1991, my senior year of high school.
See, this is the kind of thing where there's only a couple years difference between us, but this is the kind of thing where it's kind of a big difference. Because this was right when I got to high school, like I was a freshman, and this was a big deal. This kind of determined what music was going to be like for me all through high school. This is pretty much what we listened to.
And the same here. I mean, for me, it was college. Unfairly, maybe, but this particular album is like an icon. It has a myth behind it. It's considered like the start of the grunge movement. It wasn't. There are other bands and other. So it's the first one that crossed over, right? It had 5 number one hits.
What would those be? That obviously Smells Like Teen Spirit. Lithium.
Yeah, Lithium.
Come As You Are. And I don't know what would the other. Maybe In Bloom.
Let's see.
Was that one a top hit? Because I was surprised. I saw the album was only number 6. How was that possible?
I think Plane was another one. On a Plane.
On a Plane? Really? I don't realize that one.
Lithium, Come As You Are, Smells Like Teen Spirit. Something in the Way. I don't know if they got up to number 1. Smells Like Teen Spirit, Come As You Are. Definitely.
Oh, okay. Okay, not number 1. You mean just Billboard?
Maybe top 10 or something.
Okay.
But I mean, as I was listening to the album, I'm like, oh yeah, that's a radio. That's a radio hit. That's a radio hit. That's a radio hit. Just on and on and on. They're releasing them as singles, for the radio for like the next year. It was kind of funny. It was like June 1992. This one, I'm like, the album had been out for almost a year. But anyway, so it's considered kind of the first grunge album because it crossed over. So it's the first one that really exposed it. It kind of set the scene for this Seattle sound that people then attribute to grunge. It's because of them, a lot of acts became mainstream, like Alice in Chains, Soundgarden. Pearl Jam also kind of crossed over. But let's just take when it came out. So 1991, here are some other albums that came out in 1991. And we talked about this when we talked about The Chronic. You've got Nirvana, you've got U2's Achtung Baby.
Yeah, that was a good album. I had that. That was
Use Your Illusion 1.
Yeah, also a good album.
You've got Temple of the Dog came out. You've got Metallica's Black Album came out. You've got Pearl Jam's 10. You've got Soundgarden's Bad Motorfinger. You've got Red Hot Chili Peppers' Blood Sugar Sex Magic.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, just on and on. And what a year for...
That was the other one that hit me the way this did. The first time I ever heard the song Under the Bridge, the first time I heard that song, I stopped what I was doing and I was like, that is awesome. I was like, I need to listen. I need to buy that album and listen to that over and over again. I was at a party. I remember the first time I heard it like it was yesterday. It was the exact same thing with this one. I remember where I was and what I was doing when I first heard it. And it made a huge, huge impact on me right away. It was December of 91, the first time I heard it. I remember what I was doing and where I was and stuff. So,
yeah. Well, it was an amazing album. And I mean, just, God, look at that competition. I mean, just how could you narrow it to like the top 5? But like you've got Nevermind, Black Album, Pearl Jam 10, Soundgarden, Red Hot, Guns N' Roses. I mean, you just on and on and on and on. It's just what an insane year. And this one came out late 91. And I was really associated with 92, which is when The Chronic came out. It was just, I think it was like November 91 when Nevermind came out. That means that by the time, my senior year was kind of over, that's all you heard.
I have September 24th, 1991 written down as the release date, but I think it was a pretty slow burn. I
Yeah,
don't
it
think
was.
I don't think it hit everybody right away. So
it came out, and then all of a sudden, like at the start of the year, it got MTV. This is back in the days that if there's anybody younger than like 35 listening, you would understand this. But MTV used to be really influential when it came to pop culture. Kind of, they could make or break bands just by what they would choose to play, and they played the hell out of "Smells Like Teen Spirit." And the first time I saw it, I was like, "Holy cow, what is this?" And then it just took off like a rocket in '92. And it never stopped. It was just one hit after another, after another, after another. And then they kept going. In utero. I think 2 years later, he died in '97 or '94.
94.
94. So I think In Utero must have come out in like 92, 93.
Yeah, I think I want to say I was in, was it 10th grade or 11th grade? But it was one of those. It was either 92 or 93, and then he died in April of 94.
Right.
So it had been out for a little while, but I think it was still big in the charts when he died. I think it was still current and like still going forward. So
for sure.
Again, I remember when that happened. I remember where I was when I found out that happened.
That he quote unquote killed himself.
Is this like a Jeffrey Epstein thing? Or?
I don't know. There's a conspiracy theory that says what's her name actually had something.
Courtney Love killed him.
Yeah, total conspiracy theory. People, I'm not saying I'm not wearing a tinfoil hat. Dave's going to attest to that. No, and there's actually a documentary. I think it's called "Soaked in Bleach" about the whole thing. You can go out and watch it and decide for yourself. It's a really interesting documentary. I think more than anything, it proves that they had a very rocky relationship.
I imagine so. They were both doing a lot of heroin.
Yeah, pretty much everybody knows she was a complete mess. If you read Kurt Cobain's sort of background, you realize that, man, he had a really, really broken background that he came from. So it makes sense. The lyrics and the songs that he would sing, the things that he would try to illuminate in his life, it really does make sense. The sense of loss and kind of self-loathing and stuff like that.
It's funny talking about the Courtney Love thing. I hadn't thought of this before while I was reading about Nirvana, but it's very similar to the Sex Pistols and like what happened with Sid and Nancy. Yeah, because it's that band changed music like completely over the course of like a couple of months, completely changed where rock music was going to be for quite some time. Yeah. And they had this just meteoric thing, and then the guy was dead like almost before you knew it. It's almost like, I'm sure that Kurt Cobain knew that story and was well aware of all that. That would have been a big part. So it's almost like people live out, the stories that they've heard before. It's almost like he was living out the Sid and Nancy thing in a way, like finding some chick to do heroin with and then killing himself. And like, I don't know.
That's odd. I never put those two together, but you're absolutely right. The Sid and Nancy, strange. I don't know. His going out was really, that took all of us by surprise, because
it took me by surprise, but there was
top of the world,
They were on top of the world, and I was very excited. I'd just gotten In Utero was a big deal. I was listening to it all the time, and I was literally thinking like, this is great. I'm going to have this band to listen to for like a long time. Yeah. And there was a weird sense that something impendingly bad was going to happen at the time, because I remember Eddie Vedder disappeared for like 4 or 5 days or something, and everybody figured he had killed himself. Everybody was I
vaguely remember that. Was that like in Europe or something? Or
something like that. It was Germany, like in Europe, and it was not long before Kurt Cobain killed himself. Yeah. And I remember sort of feeling like those two stories were wrapped up into one thing. And I was like, for some reason, I was like, this movement is going to have some big tragic thing happen. And then when Kurt Cobain killed himself, it was like, I almost felt like that's the thing that I was kind of waiting, because this happens in rock, like, what are the other famous, I guess Jimi Hendrix died not really right after he was famous. It was a while later, right? Yeah. And
he was only about 25, I think.
He was young. I think he's 27. I think 27 is the age where these guys die. Also from Seattle, weirdly enough.
Yeah, he was from Seattle. That's right.
Which is a strange place to be.
I was listening to like at a bar one time, and they had like, they have like a commercial version of Pandora for bars, and so they were playing. I think they were playing the channel's called Lithium, or maybe it was like XM.
Yeah. There's an XM. Yeah, there's an XM radio station. The alternative rock is called Lithium.
Yeah. So Lithium was the channel they had on, and I remember listening, and it was like Nirvana played, and then it was like Soundgarden, and then Alice in Chains, and then like Stone Temple Pilots, Smashing Pumpkins, and I was like, I cannot go see any of those 5 bands in concert, the original bands in concert, because you had Kurt Cobain, you had Bruce Staley from Alice in Chains, OD. You had
True.
obviously you had Chris Cornell from Soundgarden. You
Yeah.
had Weiland, yeah, from STP, and then you had I think the guitarist or the bassist from Smashing Pumpkins, OD'd.
I didn't know that. Is that
Yeah,
true?
just it was just one on and on and on, and I think it was. Let's make sure before I.
It's possible. I don't think it happened back then, or at least maybe it did. But I know the guy from No Blind Melon. Remember that band?
Yeah, that
It was
one.
right around this same sort of like alternative music vibe,
Was a
different kind
Smashing
of music.
Pumpkins drummer. All these great '90s bands, they just could not lay off the smack, and heroin was a big part of it because I think Bruce Staley from Alice in Chains, also,
The guy
and
from the Foo Fighters just died.
yeah, he died too. Anyway, there was just something in the time, something in and maybe that's why Nirvana is and should be kind of put on the pedestal, because you listen to their songs, they're very introspective. They're a lot about kind of self-loathing, discussions about social issues and the problems with society. And
So that's a big question with this album.
uh-huh.
Do you think the lyrics have a lot of meaning, or do they just fit the? Did they just scan with the song and he's kind of like making up almost gibberish, or is there? I remember at the time listening to especially the lyrics "It Smells Like Teen Spirit"
Mhm.
and trying to like transcribe them, figure out what he was saying, and then trying to ascribe meaning to it. And I felt like I did. I felt like I got what he was saying. But then I've heard some things later, like Dave Grohl was saying that they would sit down to record, and 10 minutes before they recorded the song, Kurt Cobain would be scribbling out lyrics on this. And I'm like, I don't know how deeply thought through those lyrics are, if that's the way you do it. But maybe he was like a poetic genius and he really was writing great poetry 10 minutes before the song was recorded. But
I don't know. I mean, what I got from a little amount of research I do, which is all Wikipedia based, was that
it's a starting point.
he was filling in lyrics, like during a recording session, he would kind of finish a song lyrics up. But I think the crux of the song, like the main part of it, came from like his poetry. And I can't remember which song it was, but I think it might have been Lithium, maybe, where it's pieces of different poems that he wrote, and he would put the lines together.
Yeah, so maybe what's happening is that that he wrote the lyrics with a lot of thought beforehand as a poem, and then what the last minute thing is fitting it to the song.
Yeah, I think that
so
kind of makes sense, or making it rhyme or something like that.
I may be falling for a trick here, but the lyrics are good. They're cool language, like they sound like poetry to me. I mean,
yeah, me too.
There's a great sound to them. They fit the song really well. They're strangely. Well, I was just listening. There was the grateful vacuum of affluence. Mm-hmm. There's like that the one there. I was just listening to the album before we recorded while I was walking to go get groceries, and I was listening to those lyrics, and I was thinking, those are good lyrics. Like I'm pretty sure that's what he probably sat around writing the poetry at different times and then turned it into a song later.
Well, I mean, apparently, he'd been kind of songwriting or doing poetry for years, and sort of in the outskirts of the music industry for a while. I know Pauly was supposedly about a case where a girl was kidnapped and like raped and held for ransom.
Oh, wow.
And like
I didn't realize there was actually a dark story behind that. That was just a weird.
In the song, Pauly wants a cracker. I think I should get off her first. She wants a glass of water to put out the blowtorch. So in the real life case, I guess this girl befriended her kidnapper and finally kind of convinced him to let her go. And that's how they ended up finding them and stuff. But that's about like something that really happened, I think. The rest of them, I think, I don't know.
I mean, they tend to have they're a bit like Joy Division lyrics. Mm-hmm. They're sort of they have a feel to them. They set up like put forward an emotional picture rather than really any kind of story. That one's got kind of a story to it. The one that's become really popular years and years later, Something in the Way. Mm-hmm. That one has kind of a little story to it. I remember really liking that one. And just recently, like in the last couple of years, hearing it played in places, and I was like, "Oh, other people like that song too. That's weird." Like,
what's the story behind?
What's that?
What's the story behind that one?
The story, I don't know. It's just like it's a picture of a story of somebody living under a bridge, and like it just kind of paints a picture of an actual narrative a little bit more so than I don't mean a story behind the lyrics, like how he wrote the song. I do know the story of how they got Smells Like Teen Spirit though. Did you come across that? The title?
No.
It was so they had like kind of a scene in Seattle, and they hung out with a lot of Riot Girl bands, and one of the lead singers for Bikini Kill, Kathleen Hanna, just wrote on the wall, Kurt smells like Teen Spirit, like just teasing him. He didn't even know it was a deodorant. He just thought it was some kind of a political statement. So he wrote it into his poetry and ended up using it as a song title.
That's funny. So
apparently he had a really bad breakup with one of the girls in that scene. And I'm having trouble remembering what her name was or what band she was from. It wasn't Bikini Kill. It was somebody else. I looked her up. She was cute, but
yeah, I know which one you're talking about. Yeah, apparently he wrote a lot of his stuff was about her.
Apparently. Hey, should we do a drink?
Yeah, we that's something that we do. That sets us apart from all the other billions of podcasts out there. That's why we're so famous.
So I'm gonna mix my drink while we talk. So talk me through what I'm putting into this.
This is the lumberjack, right? I'll just say, look, ladies and gentlemen, we looked for something that would make sense. That goes with Seattle. Automatically we went to Olympia beer.
Apparently that's hard to get everywhere in the Northwest, right?
Yeah, you can't really get that anywhere but Tacoma. So we settled on something that we found called the lumberjack cocktail. It's a concoction that mixes apple cider, bourbon, lemon juice, and maple syrup.
All right, so we got cider.
Let's see, add bourbon, so 2 ounces of bourbon.
How much bourbon to cider? What's the ratio? Too bad we don't have a YouTube channel. Watch you make cocktails.
I know. People would be turning it right now. All right. Well, I'm going to make 3 ounces of bourbon because that's how much bourbon I have. So if I'm doing my math correctly, that should be 6 ounces of cider.
Oh, that tastes pretty good. I'm not doing it with as much with as much flair as you are, but I just mix it all together.
I'm sure yours is just fine. It smells good. Starting to smell good anyway. Did you use real maple syrup or Mrs. Butterworth?
I used what we had, yeah. Not real maple syrup.
Draining it into a very, very, very tall glass. Wow. Yeah, that's really good. The lumberjack cocktail.
Lumberjack cocktail. All right. Yeah.
I don't know if Cobain would have approved, but
probably not. I was trying to think of what he would have drank, but I don't know. I guarantee they drank a lot, but I don't know what it would have been. Maybe.
I'm thinking beers. They were kind of like working class guys, and
yeah, I guess so.
Probably just Olympia beers or something like that.
Yeah. I can't remember if I've ever had Olympia beer.
It just tastes like cheap beer.
Yeah, so I think it's just kind of like a Pabst or something like that.
Yeah, it's not the best stuff in the world. So, all right, got our drinks.
All right, got our drinks. That's a necessary part of this equation here.
I'm not saying that you have to drink to get through this podcast, but it helps.
Yeah, those of you at home listening do not have to drink if you don't want to.
So let me go down that list again. So that was, if you want to make this cocktail, it's 2 ounces of bourbon. It's going to be 4 ounces of apple cider, 2 teaspoons of lemon juice, and then 2 teaspoons of maple syrup. Shake it to wake it, and you're good to go.
I'm enjoying it. I mostly just taste cider. And maybe I put too much cider in. But.
I don't taste any maple syrup. So
listening to this album, when was the last time you listened to this album, do you think?
Before just now.
before getting ready for the show, yeah.
You know what's funny is my daughter, my 15-year-old, is really into Nirvana.
Huh. Okay.
She has this in vinyl.
Ooh, neat.
I actually listen to this quite a bit. I mean, I listen to, I guess, the mainstays. So like Lithium and Smells Like Teen Spirit. I listen to especially Come As You Are.
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't listened to a lot of the others. On a Plane, Breed, Polly, Drain You, Stay Away. I hadn't really listened to any of those until I re-listened to the whole album, which is sort of saying something, but because they're all great songs. But I did listen to this quite a bit. It still gets a lot of airplay too.
For what airplay is worth these days, I actually just don't ever listen to the radio. If I'm in a rental car or something and I can't get my Bluetooth to work, I might listen to the radio. That's literally almost the only time I would, which I kind of miss having someone else decide what I listen to every now and then. There's a feeling like when something
wait. Aren't you married? That's a
Nice.
joke. But
Well, that's deciding what I do and what I eat, where I go and what I
where you
say.
go.
Not so much what I listen to. I'm free in that one small aspect of my life. So you said that this one hit you pretty hard the way it did for me, right? Like hearing "Smells Like Teen Spirit" was a big deal. So I think that some of that had to do with, like, I was reading about the influences on this album and on Nirvana in general, and a lot of it really is a lot like it. It's like the Pixies, for instance.
Mhm.
This sounds a lot like the Pixies. This is very much inspired by the Pixies. Sadly, I was not aware of the Pixies, when I was 14. I think I'd heard of the band, but I did not listen to the Pixies. And I wish I had, because years later that ended up being like one of my favorite bands. I went to go see them when they were in Phoenix one time.
Do you remember how big a thing Seattle was? This is a city that I hadn't heard crap about pretty much my entire life up to that point. And then all of a sudden, ooh, Seattle, you got to go to Seattle, the Seattle sound, the Seattle scene, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's wearing plaid. Everybody's dressing like lumberjacks. So the uniform based on Seattle was you had a beanie, a plaid shirt, untucked over typically a black shirt, and then ratty jeans and like work boots. Like that was the uniform. Suddenly that was the style. Right?
Yeah, I wore it. I had tons of flannel. Jeans, I always wear jeans, but I had flannel shirts all the time, and I would have like a band t-shirt and the flannel on top of that. Like you wear the flannel almost like a jacket, like unbuttoned.
Yes.
I guess you'd still see people do that, but that was definitely the thing in the 90s. That's one of the only times in my life where I actually got into dressing like in a way that was current with the times. And,
Well, what was funny about it was just like a lazy way to dress. Dressing.
Thus why I adopted.
Yeah, that's why I was so good at it too. What's funny is like the hairband era, and another great thing about this album is it is considered the thing that kind of by itself killed the hairband, which is great. If you ask me. Before this, you had to wear a denim jacket with a band logo on the back. Like he'd have like an Iron Maiden patch, like a big Iron Maiden patch would be on the back.
Right.
You'd have to wear like sort of skinny jeans. Yeah, it was a whole look. Girls would put so much Aquanet in their hair and make it stand up. And
it's funny because Metallica obviously survived.
Yeah.
The onslaught of Nirvana. Guns N' Roses survived. Yeah. Metallica, to me, and I don't think this is fair, I think I ended up liking them years later, but they seemed almost kind of country to me or something.
Metallica?
And I didn't like them. Like I didn't find them appealing at all. It might have been like a generational thing. It might have just been that there was a group of guys who were like 10 years older than me that loved metal. And that just wasn't me. Like I just wasn't into that. This was like my thing for my generation, was a slightly different take on it. For some reason, I never really felt like Guns N' Roses fit in either category. They were kind of metal, but they were also kind of punk. And they were musically really good.
Like Metallica and Guns N' Roses had a different sound than like the other hair bands. So like Motley Crue or maybe Whitesnake or Great White, like those could be considered the hair bands, right? And they sing about stupid stuff by comparison. Right? They really did. It's all about getting girls. I was about to say something else, but Alex might listen. About getting girls, doing whatever in the bathroom, Dr. Feelgood, girls. I mean,
doing whatever in the bathroom?
I don't know what they could be smoking. They could be doing other stuff in the bathroom, whatever. But Metallica sang about
the subject matter of Metallica was more sophisticated.
It was much more serious.
Actually, I loved Enter Sandman.
Yeah,
That song was I loved that one. I had that as like a single, and I used to listen to it over and over again. But I never got into Metallica in general. And I had some Guns N' Roses.
But see, that was the album. The Black Album came out in '91. That was the reason why it's so big is that's their like most popular album. I don't know whether it was before it, but it was like super like everything that they're really known for by the popular crowd. I'll say. I mean, they got popular spin with the Black Album. Guns N' Roses was also sort of serious as well. I mean, they some kind of silly songs, but Welcome to the Jungle is a hard hitting, pretty cool song, right?
Yeah.
You can play Welcome to the Jungle and Here Comes the Rooster by Alice in Chains, and it's pretty much the same the same subject, with different, little bit different sounds. But
That Soundgarden was the first grunge band that I heard. I heard them a little bit, but I remember hearing "Break My Rusty Cage" like a year or two like before or maybe its time is kind of what's the phenomenon where things kind of contract and dilate depending on your own perceptions. But
right.
These periods of like maybe 3 or 4 months feel like they were a couple of years because I was 14 and life was changing. Really, you're changing so fast, you're growing
Right.
so fast, and changing so fast at that age. And I remember just having like a whole new crop of friends when I got to high school, and everything was definitely moving fast. But anyway, Soundgarden I was aware of. That was the first Seattle band. I don't even know if I knew they were a Seattle band. And they ended up being really good. I didn't really get into Soundgarden that much, but Chris Cornell is the best singer of the crop.
Oh, absolutely. He
sort of far and away.
That guy, God. Have you ever heard there's this YouTube channel where they'll isolate a singer and they'll say like Chris Cornell without the band singing Black Hole Sun or something. And you listen to him and you're like, God, this guy's like operatic. I mean, he was just such a beautiful voice.
Axl Rose was a really good singer.
Linkin Park, by the way, was another band in that when I was at the bar listening to all those bands, Linkin Park came on too. And I was like, I can't go see them in concert.
Did somebody die from Linkin Park too?
Yeah, the lead singer killed himself.
Oh wow. Fred Durst is still with us though.
Yeah, he's kind of like athlete's foot. He doesn't quite go away. But
did you get to see any of these bands?
No, I didn't see any of them. I mean, I lived in Las Cruces, New Mexico in the 90s. Where am I going to see any of those bands, right? I was poor. I had no way to travel. People are talking about Seattle. I could barely find it on a map. And people are like going to Seattle and going to shows. And they talked about this whole scene where you could, like, imagine living in a city before these bands hit. Like, imagine living in Seattle in 1990, right? Yeah. And it's like, hey, I'm going to go see Pearl Jam tonight over at the bar. And then after that, tomorrow night, we're going to go see Soundgarden. And then, and then on Tuesday night, we're going to go see Alice in Chains. Can you imagine what that would have been like?
It would have been awesome. Yeah, it would have been great.
I mean, that's the whole point. That movie Singles, do you remember that movie from out in the 90s?
Yep.
It was about Seattle. It was about, the club scene in Seattle. And
Pearl Jam's first 2 songs are on that soundtrack.
Eddie Vedder was in the movie.
Was Eddie Vedder in the movie? Oh, that's funny.
He's actually in the movie. He's
Matt Dillon.
Matt Dillon, yeah. So Matt Dillon's in it, and he's like the leader of a terrible band, grunge band, and they're just like waiting to pop. As Eddie Vedder is one of the guys in the band.
Oh, really? Oh, that's funny. I'm not sure I ever actually watched that movie from start to finish. I've seen bits of it.
It's not.
I had the soundtrack. The soundtrack is great.
Soundtrack's great. It's not really the best, but it does. I think Cameron Crowe wrote it, and it sort of captures what was going on at the time. I mean, that's how much in the zeitgeist Seattle was. When was the last time you saw it? Other than that one, the last movie even set in Seattle. Maybe leaving.
I don't know. Even more so. What was the last big scene anywhere in America? Like, what was the last time that there was a big music scene or something?
Yeah,
like that?
You're right. God, I hadn't put it in that perspective. That's such a good point, because you had like Detroit Motown, right? You had Chicago. You had like Memphis blues,
New Orleans jazz,
jazz.
Through the 20th century, there's all these scenes that pop up.
You got, and then you've got
like punk in New York in the 70s.
And they're associated. So Seattle would be grunge, I guess. Yeah, that's a great point. I guess it kind of, but you don't really talk about it that much. I mean, Seattle is so far away from everything else in the world. Yeah, really Pacific Northwest, it is kind of a place unto itself up there that you really have to travel. If you want to, I mean, you have to want to go there. Not like you're passing. It's not like you're passing through it. Like,
no, it's not on the way to anything else.
Yeah, it's not really on the way. It is a destination. So,
like, you have to cross. No matter how you're getting there by land, you have to cross about 500 miles of nothing.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
Like when you drive up from San Francisco, there's no city until you get to Portland, and that's like 1,000 miles. That's a long way.
It's a long haul. I've done that.
And I've driven it. It's beautiful up there. It's really, really beautiful part of the country, but there's not much there in terms.
There's only so many times you can see trees.
Coming from the east, you got to cross eastern Washington, which is just pretty much just like New Mexico with even less people. It seems like. But
even now, like. Antifa still riots like every night in the city. There's still like burning cars and stuff like that. Everybody else in the world just sort of stopped doing that. like a
Yeah.
year and a half ago.
Yeah, I have to say, I saw there's a guy. I don't know when I started following him on Twitter, but he's like he's kind of mean spirited, like making fun of various social justice warrior type people. But occasionally it's kind of funny. But anyway, he always posts this material about New York and like all the terrible things going on in New York. I'm like, I live in New York. What are you talking? When is this from? This is not what New York looks like. Like abandoned cars all over the street stuff. I'm like, it looks like it always did. That's not. It might have been intensely bad, like when all the riots were going on, maybe. I really don't know because I wasn't here.
Seattle had that when I visited. It was, it had a lot of.
Have you been there recently?
A lot of drug issues. When did I go? Probably. Oh man, I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, something like that.
Oh, okay.
So not like within the last couple of years, but it was, there were people mainlining under streetlights on the sidewalk, when I was up there, and there were, homeless people all over the place. And the reason I went there was for my book, Bucket List Bars.
Oh, cool.
Because the bar that Jimi Hendrix, like I think first performed at, and I believe Alice in Chains first performed there, Nirvana performed there. It's called the Central Saloon down in the downtown Seattle area. It's been there since the 1800s. So for us, that was kind of a cool bar that we wanted to go to.
Yeah, that's cool. I like that. All the famous ones here are gone. All the CBGB type bars are all gone. I know. I never got to see Nirvana live. I would have maybe gotten to go like the next year because I think they were at Lollapalooza and they were supposed to be at the next one, but he was dead before that ended up happening.
Right.
But I remember my friend had just moved from LA to DC in 9th grade. He had just moved there. And his sister, like her big claim to fame for me was that she had seen Nirvana in LA before they moved. Like when they had Bleached out, like before Smells Like Teen Spirit, stuff like that. So I always thought, oh, she's like this music guru. And I remember I asked her, I was like, what's the next really big band going to be like? You're really in charge of things. You're really on top of things. And she was like, okay, I have a tip for you. There's this band, Stereo MCs. They're going to be the
I am the high step of word. Yeah.
No, that's Aini Kamosi. It's similar. It's similar to that. I can't remember. They had a couple of singles that were popular for a little bit, but I actually can't remember what.
Oh, it's connected. Better get yourself connected. Right.
Yes, that's it.
That's it. Yeah. If your mind's neglected. Yeah.
Stumble, you might.
I thought you were going to say, all right, there's this band coming up. They're called the Presidents of the United States of America.
Oh my God.
The most profound. I think they were from Seattle. I think I'm going to look that up.
Maybe. I worked at a record store when they were really big, Tower Records in DC. And all the people I worked with were like in these bands that were struggling to make it. And they were so mad about the presidents of the United States of America. They were like, these guys are terrible. Like, why are they?
They were formed in Seattle in 1993.
Oh, wow. Okay. They had some catchy tunes, weirdly enough. But
so you got Nirvana on one end of the spectrum, and then you got the presidents of the United States of America with Lump on the other side of the spectrum, both from the same city.
Check this one out. I don't know if this ever got to be a lawsuit or anything, but apparently a lot of people think that the Boston song More Than a Feeling sounds just like Smells Like Teen Spirit. Let me cue up this part of it. It's right as it goes into the chorus, okay? Do you know this song that I'm talking about? I mean,
yeah, absolutely. I love that song. Sorry, everybody.
Yeah, right. Good idea.
That is perfectly, doesn't
it? Yeah, pretty good.
Yeah, I can see that. When did that song come out?
I think it's actually early 80s, right?
That's got to be. Look at that hair. 1976.
1976. Okay, yeah, I was thinking 70s, but it felt a little later than that.
Green Day's, was it American Idiot or something? Basically, that whole album sounds like other stuff,
Yeah, sure.
So I mean,
that was it. That was a good band, and they were not from Seattle, but I sort of lumped them in a little bit.
They're the Bay Area.
Yeah. Well, it's in the area, yeah, but I kind of lumped them into the grunge thing. They were a little more classic punk.
Yeah, they're kind of
with their look and stuff like Nirvana would not have had a mohawk. Nobody in Nirvana would have had a mohawk, whereas like one of the guys in Green Day did.
The Bay Area is funny too because actually Metallica's from the Bay Area. One of my favorite bands, Faith No More, is from the Bay Area.
Oh, I remember them. I like them a lot. That's
Um,
another one that was sort of like a precursor to this sound a little bit.
yeah.
Like that was one of the first things that was alternative rock that I started hearing on the radio. Faith No More. All of a sudden it changed. It was like, we always had this alternative rock station in DC, but I really started listening to that as my primary radio station in 1991, like right about the time, maybe even a little bit before Nirvana came out. But I transitioned. They said it was Michael Jackson's Dangerous was the big album in America, immediately preceding Nevermind coming out. Ugh. And I was thinking that really represents the transition in my music. As I went from being 13 to 14, it was not all pop. I always liked new wave. I liked things like The Cure and REM and stuff like that. Like, so they're kind of alternative, but they were on the radio, on the regular radio. I had Michael Jackson's Dangerous, and I remember being excited about the video for Black or White when it came out, stuff like that. And then it transitioned immediately, like for me, into this. Like this was the next thing for me. So, but I was really young. Like I was a kid. So I don't know how cool you're supposed to be when you're 12 or 13, but
well, I mean, you're supposed to. You're still. I think at that age, you're kind of looking for what it is you like. You know, because a lot of it is you're certainly being influenced by popular culture, but at the same time, we're thinking, wait, do I really like this? Everybody says I should be listening to this, but I don't really like it that much. I mean, with me, we had like 2 rock stations in this little town, and
was there a university radio station?
There was, and that's what I was getting to. Yeah, KRUX. It wasn't even rock; it was more pop. Whatever was pop is what they would play, and so you would hear stuff like Bill Biv DeVoe and all this other garbage Janet Jackson. I mean, Mariah Carey. I hated that stuff so much. And I knew I hated it. I just could not bear to listen.
I did like Bill Biv DeVoe, I have to admit. I had that album.
But every now and then, like REM would come on. And this is back like before like Losing My Religion, which is a terrible song, but some of the older REM stuff, it's horrible. It's just overplayed. That's why I don't.
It's overplayed. It is overplayed.
I can't stand to hear it because I heard it about 1,000 times, in the 90s. And every now and then a good song would come on. I'd be like, oh yeah, turn it up. I'd listen to that, and then the other junk would come on. I'd turn it down.
That feeling of having a good song come up on the radio and being like, oh, this is my song. Like, stop what you're doing. Like, listen to this. That's just kids. I hate to use this phrase, but kids today will never have that experience because you can just listen to whatever you want, which is great. But that feeling of like hearing your jam and like stopping what you're doing to get that song, I used to tape things off the radio. I had my tape recorder ready to go, and I was playing the songs on the tape deck, and I would hit record when a good one came on. I remember being so desperate. I didn't have Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet yet. I didn't have the setup like a box, like tape deck yet. So I had like one of those, office tape recorders. And I remember just holding it next to the radio on my clock radio, trying to record Bon Jovi for myself.
Dude, I've been there. Absolutely.
I was going to say, we've talked a lot about the musical legacy of Nirvana in terms of, creating the grunge era, making alternative music mainstream. But what we haven't talked about is like the successor groups to Nirvana, which is, I don't know if you remember the Breeders. Remember them? That was, I think it's Kim Deal from the Pixies, right?
I think so, yeah.
Along with Chris Novoselic. Is it Chris Novoselic? I'm having a brain mix-up.
Novoselic.
I think it's Novoselic. But it's him from Nirvana. And then, obviously, the big one is the Foo Fighters. And for me, the Foo Fighters, I was so disappointed about losing Nirvana that I just wouldn't listen to the Foo Fighters. I was just like, this sucks. Like this, because it's different. It's very different. It's more like traditional rock and roll. But in hindsight, the Foo Fighters are a really good band. And when I'm listening to this album now, I was walking around, I was like, Dave Grohl's drumming is like 50% of what I like so much about Nirvana. He's really good. It really drives, and it's very rock, like very like roots R&B, like rock style. You can hear the drums so much. I think I sort of sold him short. I just wasn't. He's actually a local guy. He's from Northern Virginia, where I grew up. He went to one of the high schools like nearby.
That's right. He grew up in DC. That's right. I read that.
Yeah, at least for part of his. I think he moved later, but he used to do this promo for the local radio station DC 101, where he would get on and he'd be like, I'm Dave Grohl from the Foo Fighters, and I swear to God, when I was a kid, I actually listened to DC 101. Like,
That's funny.
Pretty cool. And then at the Nats games, they play Times Like These. They play Times Like These.
That's a
Times
good
Like
song.
These every time the Nats win. So I have really good associations with that. And then they play Three Little Birds by Bob Marley when they lose, which is kind of a bummer.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think you're right. They are really much more kind of traditional rock and roll, but they're really good rock and roll.
They really are.
It's like the traditional, like
they're a bit like the White Stripes. They just kind of rock like an old-fashioned
maybe the White
way.
Stripes or the Black Keys. I mean, they have kind of those guys have sort of a sound where they're like a guitar and drums. No, I would say more like something from more the 70s. Not really an 80s band, but more like a 70s rock band. Like
I'm trying to think of a good example of somebody
like Jethro Tull or
a little bit like Van Halen.
Maybe Van Halen, like the 70s versions of Van Halen, or Aerosmith, not what Aerosmith became.
Maybe a little bit like Aerosmith. Yeah,
old Aerosmith stuff. I mean, just a rock band, right? The problem is you say rock band and you think hair band. Like rock band from the 80s is hair. And those were all those became like caricatures of a rock band, right? Like Motley Crue is a complete caricature, right? Yeah. But like the bands.
Hey, what has 7 arms and sucks?
What?
Def Leppard.
That's a good one. Yeah. Def Leppard. Yeah.
That's cruel. That's cruel.
Yeah, for those that don't know the story, go look it up. So I was saying, like, they're more like just kind of a traditional rock band that you'd find like the 70s or the 80s, not a band, but just a rock band.
There was a YouTube video I watched. It actually was before you picked this after I was watching this video, and it was about Smells Like Teen Spirit. The guy just breaks down the entire song and the recording of it. What makes I think his channel's like what makes this song great or something like that. Mm-hmm. And he's talking about it, and it's really, really you learn a lot about the song you're listening to. But what I remembered him saying was he was talking about how rock and roll's kind of irrelevant today, and he was saying how it became less and less popular the more it moved away from its blues roots, away from actually having like a beat and stuff like that. Yeah. And I was thinking, man, that is so true. Because when I remember I was already moving out of liking rock music. And then I heard White Stripes and I was like, oh, okay, they sound really cool. And like listening to them again, like being like, this is making me happy. This makes me want to listen to this music. Like, because they recaptured some of that old R&B vibe to the music. So
even the chords and all that stuff that like the White Stripes use, and they even admit it, like it's very traditional blues, old R&B blues.
Funny thing is, a lot of these bands, as much as their image seems very contemporary to the 90s, right? Like Nirvana and Pearl Jam and stuff, especially like Kurt Cobain really knew his R&B. Like he was really into like Lead Belly and stuff like that. Like he was steeped in that stuff. And I don't think today in 2022, I don't think there's anybody working like young people that have any idea about the roots of rock music or care anything about it.
I think you're probably right. I mean, something else, I just have to get this out there. Kurt Cobain was not a guitar god by any stretch of the imagination.
No,
very, so he stuck with what worked, right?
Right.
Power chords, and very simple rhythms. And that worked for him. Mark Knopfler, I think, is probably one of the best living guitarists in the world. And like, if you hear Sultans of Swing, for example, and if you ever actually look at the music for Sultans of Swing or even the tablature, you're like, what the hell is this guy doing? I mean, the guitar is its own thing throughout the song.
You can play a really passable version of Smells Like Teen Spirit with the capo on the first fret and just A minor, C, G.
My daughter.
Sorry, it's not A minor. It's not A minor, actually. It's actually A, G, C, E. It's very simple.
My 15-year-old plays it. It is really simple, I think. And now that I think about it, now that you say that, there are some particular bands that became really popular that I would probably classify in, like the Foo Fighters, like a very kind of traditional rock band that kind of stick to basics. I think like Blink-182 is sort of like that. They don't try to do anything, super artistic or anything. They're very, simplistic. That's another one of my daughter's favorite. That's why I hear so much of them too. But they're just very simple. They don't try to be really super complicated. Stick to basics and write a good song.
I think that's a hallmark of emo. is being pretty simple. That's where rock was losing me a little bit with emo.
Yeah.
I remember being like, oh, there's a new scene. Like I'm gonna start. I actually lived in Austin not long after that first happened. I remember thinking, oh, I'm gonna try to appreciate this scene, and I was just, I don't like the way the guy sings in Blink 182, the whiny voice and stuff. I don't know. That was, and I didn't feel like rock music. It didn't move like these. It didn't have that bluesy edge to it that like really. I was listening to this one as I was walking. I was like, every single one of these songs just moves in an old fashioned kind of way that I don't even remember being my perception of the music as a kid. But hearing it now, I'm like, yeah, this is definitely like traditional rock music. It's pretty good stuff.
Yeah, it's funny because I looked up the definition of grunge. The way they define something as grunge is it's a cross between.
I wanted to talk about that. Yeah, go for it. I was going to ask you what, because to me it's kind of just an aesthetic of the way people dress. But
no, it's a musical style that blends punk and traditional rock and roll. So you've got the structure of punk, but slowed down. It's not as fast as punk. Like punk is really fast.
Well, except for territorial pissings, right? That one that like out away.
Yeah, that one sort of does get a little bit fast.
They could be headbangers when they wanted to.
Yeah, for sure. But so it kind of blends those two musical styles. And the other thing, and the thing that really separates it is the substance of the song. Mm-hmm. So the substance focuses on more angst, self-loathing, or maybe psychological problems, whatever issues they're having. They don't talk about love. They don't talk about girls. They don't talk about, they talk about drugs.
They don't talk about how awesome they are.
Yeah, they don't talk about how awesome they are. Yeah. Like Bad Company.
That I can definitely.
Bad Company in their song "Bad Company" from the album "Bad Company" does nothing but talk about themselves in the entire song. We're bad company. That's who we are.
That one's kind of dark, though. At least that's kind of.
Versus Nirvana is like, mommy and daddy come home and they hate me, or they're not there, or whatever,
Or a kid shooting himself in front of the school. Or
a kid shoot. Yeah, I was just about to say Alive.
There's a lot. Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of dark stuff.
The song Alive, Eddie Vedder wrote that about
his stepfather, I think.
His real father.
That's right.
He never knew. And his mom, when he was 13, his mom said, "Oh, by the way, your dad's dead. Sorry, you never knew him," and walked out. And the whole song is about that. It's like, so this is something a hair band would never worry about, right?
No, you would. So that to me is legitimate. That's every single one of these bands. That's a hallmark of Soundgarden, Stone Temple Pilots, Nirvana, Pearl Jam. They all have that in common. But I was thinking about the music of Nevermind and the music of 10. Mm-hmm. They don't sound the same to me. They don't really sound like the same style. No. Because, like I'm saying, these traditional like rock and roll rhythms to the songs, Pearl Jam's not doing that in most of their stuff. They're more like, they're drawn out like long. It's good. I like it in a lot of ways, but it's a different style of music. It doesn't really sound much.
They have a better guitarist, I think.
They do have a better guitarist. Yeah, that's true.
Cobain was, and same with Soundgarden. I mean, they were like, so Soundgarden
better singer. Honestly, Eddie Vedder is a better singer than Kurt Cobain too.
But they had between Pearl Jam and Soundgarden, they had a full band. I think they have 5 members. So the bassist, lead guitar, lead singer, or maybe just 4 of them, and a drummer. Whereas Nirvana had, guitarist, bassist, and drummer, and that was it. And so they can get a little bit more range out of what they're doing, right? Yeah. They can do more musically, I guess. But the messages, though, were still very introspective. They were very much about life as a young person in wherever they are, right? Whatever those messages have to be.
Think about the way Alive starts versus the way Smells Like Teen Spirit starts. Smells Like Teen Spirit right away. It's like you get a beat right away. You get the beat. You know what beat's going to go through the whole song. And Alive starts out with a long guitar solo.
Yeah, that's a great. And it's a great riff too.
Very different.
That's one of my all-time favorite.
I love that album. I don't know which of these 2 albums I like better. I really liked that album a lot. I haven't listened to it in years.
Yeah,
but I used to listen to 10 just as much as I listened to this.
10 is a wonderful album. But I think there's something about, and I think it is the rawness of Smells Like or of Nevermind.
Yeah,
for the entire album, I think the rawness does take it to another level because it's like I've taken all my makeup off. I'm totally burying my soul here. this is raw. This is my message. You know, we're a screwed up generation, and we come from screwed up people that raised us, and we live in a screwed up world. And this is just sort of who we are. And we're not going to try to sugarcoat it. And I think that, and then also we're going to wear whatever we found on the floor in our room.
Yeah, that was part of it.
To the stage, you know? Yeah. So, I mean, and in interviews or whatever. And
like these two singers from Pearl Jam and Nirvana, both of those guys are like model good looking guys.
They are, yeah. Absolutely.
But the way they dressed was like, you know, the floppy stringy hair, and he's got that grandma sweater on for the unplugged.
The green one. I want to buy one of those.
You know? So it was like they knew they needed like a front man to the band. They needed like a good looking guy in the band, but it was like the opposite aesthetic for like how they dressed and how they acted and stuff like that.
That's true. Well, I don't think
that was the grunge.
I don't think the looks hurt. Like if they looked like Meatloaf, I don't think they would have had the same success. So.
Well, you know what? I think we're kind of we're starting to run a little bit long on time. There's tons to say about this, but did anything surprise you about this? This is a work that I know backwards and forwards.
Yeah, I don't know if.
I guess my biggest surprise. Sorry if I cut you off, but I have to say my biggest surprise is the role of Dave Grohl and the drums in this album, and when I listen to it, how much of what I like about it is the great drums and the great beats. That's something that's kind of new to me coming back to it now after all these years. Yeah. So I don't know if anything like that jumped out at you.
You know, not really. I tried really hard to find a surprise.
Here's another one. The title of the album, Nevermind. Mm-hmm. I actually always thought that came from Where Is My Mind, the Pixies song that Smells Like Teen Spirit kind of rips off a little bit. Mm-hmm. But it's not. It's from Nevermind the Bollocks, the Sex Pistols album.
Yeah.
Which again brings back that whole Sid and Nancy thing. Like,
so
I think that's definitely on his mind. Anyway, go ahead. What you were going to say?
No, I was just going to say, I didn't find a lot that was surprising. I mean, this is the first time I really kind of took a deep dive into their history, and the one that really stands out is Kurt Cobain. I found out about, he had a really broken history. He had to live with like friends of the family because I think his dad went to jail or died or something like that, or maybe his mom went to jail. Anyway, he just had a really broken home. But the thing is, that wasn't surprising. This is the age of where my dad split when I was 3. And I got to be honest with you. I think I knew more people my age that I went to school with who had broken homes than I knew people that had normal homes that stayed together. It was just something about that generation, the generation before us, the baby boomers or whatever. They just, I don't know what it was.
They were the first generation that could get divorced.
Yeah.
That had still gotten married.
There was no stigma. And there
was no stigma, but they had gotten married young the way people had traditionally gotten married, but they were suddenly allowed to get divorced. So they did get divorced. So, I really think people of our generation, maybe I just think a lot highly of us, but I went into getting married with a lot of thought. I really was a choice. Like I wanted to get married. I was ready to get married. I was going to make it work. I did not feel forced into it. I just think that's kind of what we're like. It seemed to me like all of my friends came from divorced families when I was growing up, but that may have been a selection.
You did too, didn't you?
Yeah, my parents were divorced, but it seems like that may have been a selection thing though. Like I may have sort of gravitated towards kids who had a little bit of
maybe. I mean, I just know that most of my friends, that's kind of the household they came from.
Yeah.
But
it was super common.
But I guess what I'm saying is that, so when I found out about his history, it wasn't a surprise, because I'm like, oh, okay, well, that sort of makes sense, first of all, with the lyrics and stuff that he's singing. And that kind of stuff makes you a bit introspective, and really kind of think about things beyond girls, and
maybe it does, yeah.
And Dr. Feelgood and stuff like that,
I was definitely a very introspective child.
Yeah, and I think that Gen X is a very introspective generation. And so I guess what I'm saying is, no, I didn't really have any surprises, and I need to cut myself off because I could talk about this for a long time. But this was my pick. Tradition on the show is that you have to decide, since it's not your pick, you get to decide whether this thing is a classic.
Steed is the pick.
That's it.
This is the classic, no question.
Bing, bing, bing. Okay.
This is an album that I loved that I still love when I listen to it. I had no problem listening to it. I enjoyed listening to it again. It's got huge historical impact.
Yeah.
This is 100% a classic. This is, if you were telling the story of rock and roll in the last 20 years of the 20th century, this is in your story. If it's not, you're missing something.
Very cool.
This is a big one. And this is probably, if I had to choose one from all of grunge, this is probably the most emblematic, even though I do like 10, probably just as much as this. I think this is more emblematic than 10. That's probably why you chose this instead of that to talk about here. So,
absolutely.
I'm going to go ahead and toast it. I'm in.
All right. Glad to hear that. And so for our next episode, we're going to do something else. What are we doing?
Next episode, we're going to do some literature. We're going to do Stephen King's book, first novel, Carrie.
Is that called literature? Do we call it literature?
I think so. We're going to talk about it quite a bit.
I guess we'll find out.
I think this book qualifies as well, anyway, I actually have sort of a unofficial lifetime goal bucket list thing of trying to read all of his books, because I've read a huge swath of them, and this is one I had not read. So
save it, and we'll talk about it next time. So
cool.
Thank you for joining us, everybody, for Toasting the Classics. I am Clint Lanier,
and I'm Dave McArthur. I just realized that's the first time we said that today. We didn't tell everybody.
That's okay. That's okay. We kept them guessing. And until next time, peace out.
Peace out. That's it for episode 65 of Toasting the Classics. For those playing along at home, stay tuned to find out what we'll be drinking for our discussion of Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas. There's so much to choose from. If you'd like to get in touch, please send us an email at toastingtheclassics@gmail.com. Send us show ideas, comments, complaints, and let us know who you'd like to hang out with the lights out, a mulatto, an albino, or a mosquito. Check out my blog at theattractivenuisance.com and follow us on Twitter at @RactiveNuisance. Our music was written by Michelle McArthur. See you next time on Toasting the Classics.